If I go to the use case manager and put on the attribute for search, show me just building blocks. There are quite a few of them, and they are denoted by that BB column thing. That's a building block. Why are those so prevalent in QReader? Why do I need them? Well, in order to show that, let me draw a simple analysis. I think that this is a fantastic concept, of course, the building blocks, but I think that the name may not be as descriptive, or at least it wasn't the first time that I saw that. If we are writing a main program in any language, since the days of structured programming many years ago, and you find in your program something that is repetitive, something that you do quite often, so you are executing instruction here, and then at one point you call a function, you invoke a function, and you may pass some parameters and stuff, and then that function is somewhere else in your program, separated from it, and it has all the logic of the things that that function performs, and then when it finished, it returns to where the program was, and the program continues to execute. And should you need those things again, you invoke that function once more, so then you don't have to duplicate or triplicate or constantly adding this bit of code everywhere in your main program. That's as basic as it is. That's been established since the very early days in computing. That's the concept of a function. Well, building blocks, think of it as a function as well. Let's actually take a look at some of those names. So basically, these building blocks have the very same logic that the rules has, and more on that later, but they do not work on their own, in the same way that a function in a program doesn't do anything until the main program calls them. And these building blocks are actually going to be invoked or called or used by rules in your program. And actually there can be some nesting of a building block calling onto another and stuff like that, but let's keep it simple. So obviously in this particular case, if we are searching for a condition that if this is happening on the ports that are used by databases, well, we invoke that building block, and we don't have to even think about what are the ports for databases. And should you want to modify the database ports in the future, well, you go to that building block and modify it, and then you don't touch the main program. Everywhere that the main program invokes that building block, the changes will be reflected in there. The question always comes, which is, well, if I'm putting, for example, these things and IP addresses and stuff like that, why don't I use reference set? And you can actually, in the logic of the rule, you can invoke things that are on a table, as simple as a reference set, or it can be a map of table, it can be something, a key value pair type of thing. The advantage that the building blocks have on top of those structure is that in the building block you can specify CDAR ranges, which at least until, as far as I know, in the reference sets you cannot invoke IP addresses by a CDAR range. So you will need to actually put every one of them individually in it. How do you create a building block? I'm actually going to use the old UI that QReader has to show you that part, because I think that looks better there. This is something that very few people will need to use, but let's actually go here on their offenses and let's click here on their rules. And much like in the use case manager, you can display here rules or building blocks. So how do you create a building block, that function that you want to invoke on a call? And I have a separate video that is about tuning, that I show how Mitch Hale showed me how to tune a rule that we don't want to fire when certain conditions occur, and I want to make it in a modular way like a function. Also, before I forget, sometimes when you create a rule, if we go here on the action rule, you can create events that works on logs or events, flows, or a common rule that works on both. And we also have this option. Of course, the things that you look on a rule for events is different than the ones on flows. There are some things that are in one but not in the other, and the common is a subset of the two. So sometimes if you are modifying a common rule, like in the case of that video that I mentioned before, and you don't have something that will happen on the flows, well, you can create a building block based on flow, and then you will have all those conditions in there. So like in that example, let's say that I have a common rule and I want to look for something. In that case was destination bytes, but it's a common rule. So that common rule, if we were to create a common rule here and we want to look for bytes, we don't have them in there. However, if we create a rule, we'll see that this is going to be a building block because we're going to use this button here, export as building block, and we type the word bytes here. Oh, now we do have the conditions that we want. So that therefore the flexibility of the tools, and then the way you will build these things, that you will use whatever logic you require to have. You put all your condition much like you do in the rules. You assign it to a group, all the same thing as a rule, but instead of clicking here finish and giving it a name to be saved as a rule, no, you don't do that. You actually click here and export as building block, and that will create your function, your logic that enables you to make your rule easier to be read, because you are not duplicating all that extra logic all along your rules. And again, if you want to modify that building block later, you don't have to touch the rule that invoke that one. I encourage you to watch that video in the section for creating your own rules on the PDF. You know that the link to that PDF is in the video description of all my videos. You go to a public box folder. At the end of all the folders are in there is a PDF, which is an index of all the videos I have created, that is much easier to be searched. When you're going to download the PDF, do Control F and search for whatever topic is. You will find there a section for rules, where this video I'm planning on putting there as well, and you can see that example better, in case that I have not done a good job of explaining that a building block is nothing more than a function that you invoke from a rule in QRadar to make the code or the logic more modular and easier to be read.